This is the Whirly Bird Productions podcast. I'm your host, Amber Williams. I discuss film finance and distribution with filmmakers and entertainment lawyers. Elektra Yao is an award-winning artist visa and entertainment lawyer in New York City. Elektra is the founder and principal attorney at Yao Law Group law firm, dedicated to international and domestic artists. She is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Black Entertainment and Sports Lawyer Association, and the New York City Bar Association, where she is a member of several committees. Elektra is fully fluent in French, Italian, and Spanish. She has successfully represented record labels, modeling agencies, production companies, individual artists, and creatives. On this episode, Elektra shares a wealth of information about immigration to the States, focusing on green cards and business visas. It was a joy talking with such an intelligent and knowledgeable woman. I hope you find this episode as eye-opening as I did. Elektra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Amber. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you and talk about all things U.S. immigration.
Yes, I am too. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited.
I'm happy to be here.
So can you talk us through, for anyone that doesn't know, what a green card is?
Great. So a green card is a modality to live in the U.S. permanently. It's not citizenship, so you're not a U.S. citizen, but you're granted permanent stay here in the U.S. Because it is not citizenship, you have to renew your residency every 10 years. Now, there are different ways of getting your green card. You can get your green card through family, you can get your green card through work, or you can get your green card through humanitarian reasons. So these are three different processes with multiple different subcategories, but there are all different ways for you to remain in the US permanently. I think a lot of people have heard about a green card through marriage, so I'll just talk about that very, very quickly. So basically, when a foreign national is married to a US citizen, whether a US citizen by birth or a US citizen by derivation, whether you were born abroad to American parents or whether you were a foreign national that became a US citizen, when a foreign national marries a US citizen, he or she is considered to be a first preference relative, right? Considered to be an immediate relative. These spouses are at the top of the line or at the top of the queue to receive a green card. The process or the timing for receiving a green card is roughly around a year after the case or the petition has been filed. It's a really exciting time right now to file your green card, obviously, if you qualify, because right now there are no interviews. So prior to COVID, there were interviews to kind of vet out your relationship to make sure that this was a proper relationship, done for, traditional purposes. As long as it wasn't done for an immigration purpose, you had an interview with an immigration officer. Now, cases are being approved very quickly without an interview. So if you are married to a U.S. citizen, now would be the time to capitalize off the fact that interviews are being waived. So the marriage-based green card is the green card that is most typically thought of or discussed when we're talking about green cards. Now, the second way is through employment. Now, what's really interesting about U.S. immigration law is that through employment, you can petition for yourself. So you don't need an employer and you can apply for a green card on your own, or you can be sponsored by a company. Now, let's talk about the first option where you petition for yourself without a company kind of backing you up. This is for people who have a very, very high level of competency within their field, people who are usually at the top of their field. So just to put this in very simple terms, think of like, foreign celebrity, like Hugh Grant, for example. Hugh Grant can apply for a green card on his own based on his own merit because he has reached the pinnacle of his field. He's probably won numerous acting awards, been in a lot of different films and productions, so he would have no problem applying for a green card without an employer. Let's say, for example, you have not reached this very high level within your field. You can still apply for your green card, but you need a company to sponsor you. So think of Google. Google wants to hire you, for example, and they really think that you'd be a great fit for their company. They would file what's known as a perm application. So a perm application is a permanent application for you to remain within the country. Now, this has a couple of additional steps. We have to go through the Department of Labor, and then we have to go through immigration or USCIS, but it's still a valid way. It's just a little bit longer than self-petitioning, which is basically applying without the employer. Now, the third way is what we call a humanitarian process. So let's say, for example, you have been the victim of a crime, or let's say, for example, you are a victim of human trafficking, or let's say you are the survivor of an abusive spouse. You can self-petition for your green card based on these unfortunate events. And that's the humanitarian way. So the US immigration system has carved out these different situations where a foreign national is in a vulnerable situation and they can self-petition for themselves. So those are the three different ways of getting a green card.
Okay. So the extraordinary ability, you basically need to be a celebrity.
No. I work on many non-celebrity cases. So I just used Hugh Grant to kind of demonstrate that you have to have a high level of demonstrated expertise. When I mean demonstrated, I mean like you can be great at robotics, but for example, if your robotics career is not documented through, for example, press or recognized in the field by other experts, then it would not rise to the level of extraordinary ability. So the extraordinary abilities green card or the self-petition green card is commonly used by artists. It's the artist version of the green card, or creatives. So I use those terms very, very loosely because it's kind of really hard to define art and creativity. So I've done actors, I've done nail techs, I've done hairstylists for green cards, I've done journalists, I've done all different types of people that use creative processes to get to accomplish their work. Obviously, extraordinary ability is not only for the arts, but it's also for those in athletics, in business, in science. Yeah. So there's a bunch of different fields that it applies to. What is common to all these different fields and professions is you must have reached a high level within your field. So a common misconception, Amber, is is that people think you need to be a celebrity, that you need to have won awards, and those are helpful, but not dispositive to winning the case.
Okay, so in film and television, multiple professional credits would would qualify you for a green card kind of thing. Where does the bar kind of, where is the threshold kind of thing?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, yes, of course, you need to perform in different types of films, but it's also the type of film that is important. So for example, it can't be like a student film, right? It needs to be a film that been submitted to festivals, maybe won awards, maybe you won awards. But legally, there are 10 criteria, and you need a minimum of 3 criteria to meet the first part of the analysis. This 3-part criteria is usually satisfied by proving the different productions that you've performed in or the different productions you've worked in. Because, for example, even somebody who's a crew member can also apply for the extraordinary ability self-petition green card. So the productions you've worked on, the press that you've garnered within your career, and the original contributions that you've made to your field. Those are typically the 3 criteria that are used to prove the first part of the analysis. Now, original contributions is kind of a very difficult and conceptual criterion, right? Like, it's hard for somebody who's on this extraordinary ability green card to self-assess and understand what their contribution to the field has been. And you might also be wondering, like, how is this proven? Like, how do I actually prove what my contribution is? This criterion is typically proven with letters of recommendation or testimonial letters by experts within the field. So let's say, for example, your contribution to the field has been advocating for diversity and inclusion in film and TV. This achievement or this impact will be memorialized or documented through and confirmed through these different letters of recommendation by experts in the field. Now, these experts needn't have worked with you. There's no law, the law doesn't state that you need to have worked with a person, but they need to be documented experts within the field. Most of the time, there is at least one celebrity type person that is a person confirming the expertise of the foreign national, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a celebrity. In the film and TV world, it's very unfortunately complex because USCIS really does not look favorably upon performers. So this is the case type, or this is the profession that is most highly RFE'd. So an RFE is known as a request for further evidence. This is where the government wants additional information. And oftentimes, these letters or these notices asking for additional evidence are asking you to reprove what has already been submitted in the case, or they're applying the wrong legal standard to your case, or flat out they're ignoring everything that was submitted. So this is very, very frustrating on behalf of the client or the foreign national, and I fully understand that. But USCIS does not like performers, singers and dancers, due to the instability and volatility and chameleon-like consideration of those professions. So performers performing in a show or performing in a film, this can change from night and day, right? You can have a producer that has secured funding, and then the day after, the contract does not go through. Or for example, you secured a location, but something happens. Or maybe the director decides to pull out of the film. These are all situations that can make it so that film or that production doesn't happen, or at most is delayed. USCIS is aware of this, and this is why they don't like the profession. They would much rather approve these traditional artistic professions, like, for example, a marketing executive, because people who work in marketing tend to be attached to large agencies, right? They tend to work for these huge marketing companies that have, very long history within the field of working with major brands. Of course, this is not to say that performers don't get approved, or singers don't get approved, or dancers don't get approved. They absolutely do get approved. It's just much more difficult for USCIS to properly analyze them and thus approve them compared to another type of profession.
Right. And is that similar with sort of directors and producers, that level, rather than the performers themselves?
No. So it's strange, because you would think that somebody who's behind the scenes would have a more difficult time of proving their leadership within a production. But no, USCIS has an easier time of approving producers and directors because the evidence that is submitted is very different. So for example, directors usually have contracts, directors have call sheets, so do performers. But it is common knowledge that a producer, or common knowledge within the field, of course, you must explain this to USCIS, that a producer is one that kind of makes the film happen, right? They're the ones responsible for securing the funding of the film, for organizing the budgets of the film, for working with the executive producers to make sure that the film moves forward. The director is the person within the film who, this is what USCIS thinks, but I'm sure we all know that to make a film happen, you have many, many different creative inputs from all players, director, DP, gaffer, etc. But USCIS interprets directors to kind of be the creative, the vision maker of the film. So all these other crew members and performers are just executing the vision of the director.
Okay, interesting. And so you have to renew a green card every 10 years, did you say?
Yes, you do.
I didn't know that.
You do. You don't have it forever. It has an expiration date. Of course, that does not mean that if you don't renew your green card, you're no longer a permanent resident. It just means that when you go to renew it, you have to demonstrate that you haven't abandoned your residency. So I think it's important to know that there are fiscal considerations to make between remaining a resident and becoming a US citizen. So obviously, once you become a US citizen, if you choose to stay out of the US for 20 years and come back, there's no issue. You are a citizen. There's no abandoning the country because you are a citizen. The same is not true for a permanent resident. So, for example, you must come back to the US at least once every 6 months when you are a permanent resident. This can become complicated for those who have to travel a lot for work. So I represent a very well-known British photographer who, I mean, this person is in New York once a week. That's it. This person is working on shoots in Milan, in Paris, in Berlin for major publications. So for people who have to travel a lot for whatever reason, it's going to be difficult to maintain those requirements of coming to the US at least once every 6 months. And also, in order to become a citizen, you have to have at least 364 days of continuous stay in the US. So these are important things to know. And I think that what people don't realize once they become a resident and have retained their citizenship of origin and become a resident in the US is that your actions can be interpreted by an officer at the airport that you have abandoned your stay in the US. Now, this can have very drastic consequences because what they'll do is they'll take your green card, they'll issue you a notice to appear in immigration court, which is basically going to immigration court, all because, you decided to spend like 5 months in Aruba working and then coming back to the States for, a recharge. These are things that you have to be very careful about because unfortunately, these decisions are made at the border, right? These decisions are made at the port of entry when you're entering the US, when they're looking at your documents and they're asking you a bunch of questions. There is no right to counsel in those situations. So you can't just call up an attorney and say, hey, come defend me and talk to me. It can be very intimidating for some people to be pulled into what's called secondary inspection, which is basically a room where they're questioning you, questioning your intentions, questioning how long you've been in the US, how long you've been outside of the US, why have you been outside of the US? These questions can be intimidating, number one, and what you say goes on the record. And the only way for me or an attorney to figure out what's been said and the notes of the officer is to issue what's called a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act, where I ask the government for a copy of your file. This takes 6 to 8 months. So these are important things to be aware of once you are a permanent resident and you're traveling. And of course, there are people who decide to not travel so extensively and they won't have issues. But I always think that it's in your best interest to become a citizen so that you don't have these recurrent issues come up, especially if you are a frequent traveler. Of course, the fiscal considerations are, the double taxation treaties and figuring out if you're going to be, if you have to pay taxes both in the US and your country of origin. And for that, you need to speak with a tax attorney.
Sounds scary. You just got to read. I'm guessing they give you all the terms and conditions, and you need to read through it with a fine-tooth comb.
I mean, the US, there's no sort of limit on how many people can become citizens every year or residents every year. It's just that they want to ensure, or the way the law has drafted makes it seem that they want to ensure that you are truly living here. Residency is not like, oh, I'm from, Canada, and I'm just gonna, keep my residency in my pocket, just, for safety whenever I want to go to the US. No, they want you to actively live and participate in American society. I think that it's part of the law is trying to make sure that you properly assimilate to the culture, that you integrate to the culture, and that you become, an active member of society.
Yeah, give something back to society.
Yeah.
Be worth a while. So that brings me nicely into immigrant investors. So this is also a way of getting your green card.
Yes and no. So there is the green card for those who work specifically in business. It's known as the EB1C. And there's the EB5, which is probably what you're referencing, where you can make a hefty investment and then you're on your path to your green card, or you can make an investment and hire people, and that also puts you on your path to your green card. Not every country can has access to that. It depends on the nation that you're born and the nation that you're from in. But yes, those are cases where you are on a path to your green card. So you have to make a hefty investment, or you have to make an investment and hire people in certain designated areas within the US.
Okay, how much is the hefty investment?
So it's either 1 million
Yeah.
or 500,000 in hiring 10 US citizens.
Yeah. Okay. So if you invest 1 million, you don't have to hire the 10.
No, you could if you wanted to. It depends on your business model.
Yeah.
It is not a requirement. Like if you are investing 500,000, if you're investing 500,000, you must hire 10 US citizens.
Yeah. That's fair enough.
Which, I mean, depending on your business model, might make perfect sense.
Yeah.
But it's important to also realize that it's not that you get your green card right away. You are on the path to getting your green card. You're on the path to adjusting. So I'll give you an example of a client that we have. So this client has applied for the EB5. She's in the process of getting her green card. However, she wanted to have an underlying status to allow her to work. So we applied for a different work permit or work visa for her to work while her green card is pending. So it's not immediate. The time frame is around roughly 4 years. Okay. Which again might roughly 4 years is also the amount of time that it takes for a company to start up and start to make money and generate revenue. So it might not be a bad option depending on your business model. But there are other visa types that are less scary in terms of the investment that can prepare you to file for a green card application. What I always tell my clients is it really depends on what your end goal is. There's ways of getting the green card that are more straightforward than other ways of getting the green card. It all depends on what you want your trajectory in the US to be, because you can invest a smaller amount of $100,000 and really develop your business so that it grows, generates revenue, etc., and then end up applying for example, an EB1C or an EB1A self-petition instead of investing the 500,000 or the 1 million, where, like I said, the time frame is around 4 years. You can apply for a work visa today, and then maybe in a year, I deem that you qualify, and then you can apply for an EB1A, for example, and get the response in 2 weeks. So the time frame is much shorter, and the investment is much smaller. That's why it's really important to speak with an immigration attorney so that you can properly strategize your time and your money, because you might say, hey, $1 million is not a problem for me and I'm fine waiting up to 4 years, and let's go that route. Other people might want to explore different strategies and different options of getting to the green card.
So is that the international entrepreneurship rule where you'd invest like 100,000 and you could take up your own startup into the country?
So you can use the international entrepreneurship rule. I know of only 5 cases that were approved last year. I'm a part of AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which is a network of all immigration attorneys in the US and immigration and global mobility experts in Europe. And I know 5 cases that were approved last year. Because
you'd need to prove that it was a viable business, wouldn't you?
There's that option, but there's also the option that these cases are not filed as much as, for example, the E2 visa. The E2 visa is what I was referring to with the 100K investment. Now, the 100K investment is not the law. You don't need to invest 100K, but it is a figure that is going to demonstrate to the officer that there is that the business is, a viable business, and it's more likely to possibly be approved. Whereas, you could start off with a 30K investment, and that might be appropriate for your business type. And it could also be approved, but usually cases are around of 100K, although that is not the law. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it gets complicated, doesn't it?
Well, because there's the theory, right? And then there's, practice. So, the theory might be like, yeah, totally. The law is silent to the amount of money you can invest. So you decide to go with 30, but in practice, cases like that must be very, very unique cases in order for them to be approved. Whereas 100K is the figure that is most often spoken about and most often worked on.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily need to do the E2 with an investment. You could do the another visa, which is known as the startup visa, which is the visa type that startups use all the time, where there's no investment requirement. You don't need to invest any money. You need to have a high professional profile. So you need to have some sort of demonstrated track record of success, but there's no monetary requirement. And if you end up qualifying for that visa type, you almost always end up qualifying for the green card because the criteria is very, very similar, almost equal. So that's why, like I said, you have to work with an attorney that is going to understand cases that are not cookie cutter cases, right? Like not the slam dunk 100K investment cases. And also a lawyer that's going to really strategize with you to figure out, okay, is EB5, is that worth it to me? Is it worth for me, making $1 million investment, or should I take it slow and start off with a smaller investment and see where my business goes? Because remember, you're making this investment, but there's no guarantee of you getting approved. You could have something in your background, like for example, you got arrested for stealing in your home country, for example, and you're not going to get approved. You're going to have to file a waiver. A waiver is like a pardon, and that's going to create a delay. So it's important to understand that it's not a straightforward journey, and that strategy is paramount to everyone's individual success.
I know we're running out of time. So that was, I was going to talk to you about how you benefit from having a lawyer with all of these visas, but I think you've just proved that very well. So
I think I gave a speech 2 days ago at a university, and I think it's important to just understand what you want out of your relationship with your attorney. Do you want someone who's responsive to emails? Do you want someone who's going to strategize with you and talk to you? You have to understand what you want out of your attorney, just like you would try to understand that part of yourself when you're looking for a partner or a spouse or something like that. And the same as this is true for the attorney, especially in immigration law. It is a very emotional journey. It is a long journey for some. And it is an area of law that is very complex because there are multiple sources of law that we must apply to a given case. It's not like, for example, an area of civil law where we've got the civil code and that's the law. Much more complex in immigration law where you've got statutes, federal regulations, policy memoranda, bilateral treaties that apply to certain countries. All of this knowledge needs to be present within the attorney working on your case. And of course, immigration law is kind of divided into employment, investment, family and humanitarian, and removal defense. So like even in immigration, you've got like 4 or 5 different subsets. And it's rare. I think that you can't work with a generalist. I mean, you could, but I've worked on enough cases or cleaned up enough cases where a client went to someone who was a generalist and made errors. So I would say just read Google reviews, read Yelp reviews. If your attorney has social media, look at your attorney's social media, see what type of content and message they're delivering. Are they more talking educationally and trying to inform you, or are they trying to sell you something? Not that selling is bad, it's just that will give you a sort of idea of what their communication style is once you start working with them. And obviously the consultation is the first date between you and your attorney, where you kind of, get to know your attorney's or prospective attorney's personality, maybe meet some of the staff, ask the right questions. And I think I did a live video on this about the types of questions you should be asking your attorney. A lot of the time clients will try to pigeonhole the attorney by saying, well, how many cases have you won, or what's the percentage of approval? And these are questions that are extremely difficult to answer, because no attorney that is licensed to practice law can ever confirm that you will get approved for the case that he or she is working on. That is legal malpractice. And trying to understand the percentage of cases won really does not help you as a prospective client, because what if all those cases were, I don't know, student visas? That has nothing to do with, for example, an O1A or an O1B or an E2. What you really want to be asking the attorney is, what is your strategy if I were to open a shoe company? Or why would you suggest an E2 instead of an O1A? You want to be able to have, a constructive conversation with your prospective attorney, because the most important factor for winning a case is not how many times he or she has won the case before, but it is the potential strategy that will be applied to the development of your case.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. This has been really interesting and really insightful. I have learned a lot.
I'm glad. I think that immigration law is one of those really scary areas of law, just because your livelihood is at stake. Your family is at stake. You're making this huge investment, both in legal fees, in filing fees, and if you're investing in investment fees, because you need to invest your money before you even apply for the case, right? Before you even submit your petition to the consulate or USCIS. So it's a lot at stake.
It's your future, isn't it?
It's your future, your family, your ability to earn income and make money, your ability to come back into the US and go back to your home country. There's a lot at stake. You really want to make an informed decision for yourself. And the best way to do that is to work with somebody that you trust and that you can communicate with. It's been proven that even in professional relationships, communication is key to moving forward. And it's a good indicator if your attorney is not communicative with you, then maybe he or she may not be the best fit for you.
Yeah, for sure. It's exactly the same in filmmaking as well. You want to get along well with the people that you're working with on a daily basis. So
yeah. So what's unique to my practice is that I don't only practice immigration law, I also practice entertainment law, where I run into issues every day about trademarks and copyrights and release forms and the type of contract that needs to be drafted. And a lot of the times the bigger, big productions or productions that require the intellectual and creative input of multiple players, it's sometimes difficult for creatives and artists to standardize certain processes because they are very focused on creating the work, right? Focus on the integrity of the project that they're working on. Rightfully so, that should be their focus, which is why as a creative and as a professional, I think and as an artist, I think it is very important to really understand the importance of the business of the arts, right? Really start to understand how to create systems and processes that are going to work for you, number one. Understand different legal and business mechanisms that will allow you to capitalize and make money off the work that you're doing. And nobody can know everything, right? It's impossible, right? That's why I think early on in your career, when you're in film school, when you're at the conservatory, the universities need to do a better job of explaining these aspects of your career. It's 2023, and I still, in my speech the other day, very well-known art school in the US, I'm still getting what I consider to be rudimentary questions about, how to approach one's career. So I'm not faulting the artist or the creative professional. I'm just saying that the world, including the academic institutions that these artists and creatives are paying hefty sums of money to, really need to figure out what is the best way, whether it's in the form of a class or a seminar or a workshop or an internship, explaining and teaching the lessons of, the business aspects of being an artist. Because what's happening, if we're seeing, is that student filmmakers are kind of lagging behind, for example, TikTokers. Young people, not young people, but people who are utilizing social media to their benefit are really capitalizing on it and creating a career off. And if you think about it, a platform like TikTok is really just creating a film that's like 3 minutes, right? There's so many different ways of telling stories on, for example, a TikTok platform, that I'm not sure why schools have not encouraged this artistic exercise of, hey, why don't you produce a film that's going to last 3 minutes and distribute it on a global platform and see what happens. I work with performers and filmmakers who during COVID were not able to find work. Here in New York, Broadway was closed. There was nothing for that you could do attached to an institution, because for 4 months, really everything was closed. Even professional offices like mine, we had to close, or else we would be subject to fines. So what did they do? A lot of my clients, particularly my performers, and I have one lighting designer who actually did this, turned to an online platform like TikTok and started acting. Right? They were doing short films, like 30. Well, at the time, I think TikTok was like 30 seconds, right? Or 60 seconds. I can't remember. But they were doing like short mini productions, right? With a proper beginning, middle, and end. And if you think about it, that's quite a complex exercise for a storyteller. And that is one way of creating a digital following for yourself, but also really pushing the boundaries of your filmmaking. And again, placing you on a similar platform to performers, TikTokers, influencers, and all different types of creative professionals that are looking for different ways to capitalize off their artistry.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. That's one of the reasons I do the podcast, is to close the gap between the business and the creative lacking knowledge. It's very sad, because filmmakers really suffer from not knowing enough about the business side.
It is very, I studied film in undergrad, and I did documentaries, and now I represent filmmakers, and I see that the profession is still pretty archaic in terms of their approach to things, which is
the education side. Yeah,
it's quite, it's flabbergasting when you think about it, because what are you doing? You're hurting the industry. You're hurting the industry from progressing. Yeah. In America, the two main points of shooting for studios are New York and LA. Only during COVID, because the rules were so stringent in LA, they moved about 35 productions to Atlanta because the rules were less stringent. Now, this is an extreme example, COVID, but it took something extreme like COVID for a new city to pop up to kind of be like a hub for TV and film. And it shouldn't get to that point, right? We should be constantly, whether you're an attorney or an agent or a manager or a student, constantly trying to improve the profession, not only from the intellectual artistic point of view, which of course filmmakers do very, very well, but also from the business side. We cannot in 2023 ignore this aspect of becoming and acting as a creative professional. And I'm of the idea that these lessons or this integration to the profession begins if you go to university or conservatory at the university or conservatory level, because then they'll get 3 years, 4 years of this knowledge, and then they will apply to the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant.
Lots of room for improvement, I think, but it's going to take, I think, a recognizance and an awareness of the deficiencies that are currently present within the industry.
Yeah, definitely. You're very inspiring. It's been fantastic talking to you.
I'm very passionate about.
I can tell it comes across, and knowledgeable as well. And I like the way that you made the jump, because doing this podcast has made me really interested in the legal side of filmmaking as well. So that entertainment. Yeah,
I think that for anybody who's watching, who's interested in a potential career in the US, I think hopefully what you take away from this is that you should really focus on yourself and approach yourself kind of as a marketing plan, right? I always tell my clients, don't say no. We are not in the phase in our career where we should be saying no to opportunities. You never know what can happen. And especially if you're a novice at the beginning of your career, saying no is just closing doors off to networking, to special projects, to seminars, and be proactive. If you see something, or if you see a hole in the industry, be proactive. Create a seminar.
Problem solver. Yeah,
exactly.
For sure.
Get your colleagues, get your classmates involved, do something. Because at the end of the day, if anything, these are considered to be professional achievements from an immigration point of view that can be utilized in a future petition. So you don't want to self-screen and discriminate against different opportunities, because it is the attorney's role to analyze and determine what are the best professional opportunity or achievements to utilize within your petition. Because you can do so well in school, but unfortunately, from an immigration point of view, there's no academic requirement for an artist visa or an artist green card. I've worked on many cases where client did not have any sort of higher education degree, and that's okay, because it's not a requirement from an immigration point of view. So sometimes people are like, should I get a master's degree? I would say it depends. I mean, if your goal is to work in academia, then yes, you absolutely need to go and get a master's, because at least US universities won't hire you without a master's degree. But what is the end goal, right? You want to do things with mindfulness. Like, are you just going to school to go to school? I would say, sure, if you have extra money, then do it. But if your goal is to be a professional in the US, then my advice is work, right? Yeah. Work on any sort of production, whether you're getting paid the proper day rate or you're not getting paid the proper day rate. Work for a year, because then everything will pay for itself, because you'll end up making more money once you come work in the US. Yeah. The day rate of one of my gaffers is $650. Wow. It's pretty high.
Yeah, that is good.
So again, everything kind of just depends on what your end goals are. Academia is not bad, but oftentimes academia gets used as like a cushion, right? As like a pillow to kind of like soften the blow of falling. And again, if you want a career in academia, then you must continue to get degrees and to publish. But if your goal is to be an active professional working on set, on productions, then it's not necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. You can teach yourself a lot in this field anyway. Education isn't necessary at all. So I completely understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, I know a filmmaker who was a pest exterminator for 20 years. And he taught himself everything. And he worked simultaneously sending his films to festivals. They were shown in different festivals. And I was always like, you need to dedicate yourself to film full time. And he finally did it. He finally had that confidence to let go. And sometimes I think that students who continue within academia who don't have the intention of working in academia need to have that conversation with themselves where they just need to like let go and just kind of like launch themselves. And they'll see that, you know what, they might fall the first time, the second time, the third time, they might be rejected 100 times, but you have to just keep going.
Yeah. And on a note of saying yes to everything, you have done this podcast today whilst you're on holiday, which is very, very sweet of you to donate your time to us.
Absolutely. I love talking about the arts and business and immigration law.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm very grateful.
For those watching, I have many free resources. Amber, you said you'll put my information, but feel free to email me. I have 2 free ebooks, and I have an artist visa checklist. I also have a short free guide on how to file a trademark application. Email me. I'll be happy to share all my resources.
Yeah, I'll put it all in the show notes.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber. This was very fun. I really enjoyed doing this.
Thank you.